I have to begin by saying 250 million Americans are not garbage. Without question, my supporters are far higher quality than Crooked Joe or Lion Kamala.
Trying to spin garbage into gold. That's what former President Trump attempted to do by donning a sanitation worker vest and driving a garbage truck, or at least sitting in one, in Wisconsin last night. But just how long can the garbage controversy carry on before it becomes as potentially nauseating as an actual garbage dump? Our political panel is who we turn to for answers. Joel Payne's a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist, and Lance Trover, a Republican strategist in Laguna Hills, California. He served formerly as a spokesperson for North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum's 2024 presidential campaign. Lance, let me start with you. Do you think this sanitation worker bit could appeal to undecided voters versus just the Trump base?
Well, I think you first need to take a look at why he was in a garbage truck. It's because the sitting president of the United States, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris's partner over the last 4 years, called all Trump supporters and basically half of America garbage the other night.
They didn't call them all garbage. I think they immediately clarified to say he was referring to the comic who made the racist joke.
I think, Scott, we all saw the video. It's pretty clear about whom he was speaking. I mean, I know what the White House's spin on this is, but let's call it for what it is. We saw the video and what he said. And that's why he was in the garbage truck here today. But I think the finer point here is what this has allowed the Trump campaign to do is really hone in on what his message has been for 8 years since he came down the escalator in 2015, which is that the system in Washington is rigged against you, that people in Washington, politicians for many years, think you are deplorable, they think you are garbage. And there is only one person to fix it, and that's an outsider and someone like him. And so that is what I think has allowed this to go viral, and that is, I think, brought it all back home for him. And look, the voters are going to decide this in a few short days, but I think it's really a strong closing argument for him, and certainly something I don't think he expected to get.
And Joel, let me shift to you. The president did try to clear this up. The vice president has said that he was clearly correcting himself moments later, but that hasn't stopped this from being a controversy that has taken away their attention and their focus and their bandwidth. What should the Harris campaign do to put an end to this, if they can do something to put an end to this?
Yeah, I was surprised to hear Lance's POV on this, because when I saw Donald Trump in that garbage truck and slipping and sliding to get into that truck, and then also with that reflector vest on, I thought he was referring to him calling America a garbage can, which he said several times in recent weeks, and calling Americans who don't agree with him scum. And I thought it was the sundry of thing, and maybe even a reference back, obviously, to his opening act at MSG. So I kind of thought that's what he was referring to. I thought it was a little strange that he would remind people that those are the things that he and his supporters routinely say. As for Kamala Harris, one of the things that's interesting to me is, look, President Biden misspoke and clarified that he misspoke. But I actually think it's an interesting split screen, because Kamala Harris, I think, demonstrated how different she is and how different her vision is for the country by actually showing that she does not talk about people in the ways that Donald Trump talks about people, or the way that people have tried to misrepresent what Joe Biden says. Her speech on the ellipse a few days ago and her follow-up, comments afterwards, I think, demonstrate that she represents a new way forward and a different brand of leadership. So actually, I think it was a good moment for her to put some distance between the politics of the past and where she wants to take the country going forward.
And Lance, today, a Pennsylvania judge decided not to block Elon Musk's $1 million giveaways to people who signed that political action committee petition he circulates, electing to place the lawsuit on hold while a federal court decides whether to take this up or not take this up. Is that a win of some sort for Musk or Trump? Is that a meter-moving win for either of them?
I think at this stage of the game, I'm not sure of any voter who's really focused too much on what Elon Musk is doing or not doing. Unless you're that area who's signing the petition and maybe could win $1 million, then yeah, it's a victory for that person. But other than that, I don't see a whole lot of focus by any voter out there in terms of what he's doing. Every time, though, the Democrats go and try to stop Elon Musk, they just help bring further light into his message and what he wants to talk about, which is promoting Donald Trump and the fact that his efforts to clean up the government. But again, this is not, to me, as a political strategist, I don't see any voters out there really worried about what Elon Musk is doing on a daily basis.
Let's talk about the Speaker of the House, who today in New York tried to defend his comments about the future of the Affordable Care Act. He's accused Vice President Harris of lying after her campaign said Johnson and Trump would work to get rid of Obamacare. Let's listen to the House Speaker from this afternoon.
No one's repealing the ACA, but there are lots of ideas on both sides of the aisle on how we can continually improve the system, and that's an ongoing effort. It should be for every single member of the Congress. I think our constituents demand that, and we have ideas on how to do that.
Lance, you first. In 2010 and 2018, boy, the Affordable Care Act was either incredibly helpful or incredibly unhelpful to each party. What do you think the impact of this could be in the final days, Lance, on voters?
As a political operative, I commend the Harris campaign for trying to talk about this today and not the garbage comments, which they obviously don't want to be talking about from Joe Biden. Look, they have made it very clear. The Trump campaign has made it clear. Speaker Johnson has made it clear. The ACA is not going away. What I took that as somebody also who is in the exchange and pays the marketplace rate every single month as my own entity, I can tell you the cost of health care is outrageous in this country. And I think that is the overriding issue, is the cost factor that's being driven here and the overall cost of living. So do there need to be changes and reforms? My guess is you ask the average voter out there, heck yeah, they want to be paying less for health care out there. But look, pre-existing conditions are not going away. None of that stuff is going away. These scare tactics from the Harris campaign are just that, scare tactics. But I would also say we're at 4 or 5 days out of an election. This is what both campaigns do. They glom onto something and try to wrangle it away and get media attention on it.
Joel Payne, you got a thought on that?
Yeah, Scott, 5 days away from an election, I'm glad that Republicans are clarifying what they want to do to the Affordable Care Act, which is gut it. It's what Donald Trump tried to do when he was president. It's what Mike Johnson said he wants to do. I saw a tweet from Mike Lee, one of the leading Senate Republicans in the Senate, who said, kill Obamacare now. So I think they're being crystal clear, and I think that's helpful for voters to know as they go into the voting booth throughout this week and into next week.
So many divisive issues. We can all agree the dog picture behind Lance is crazy awesome. Joel Payne, Lance Trover, thank you very much.
Thank you.